Welcome to a new episode of the Business Maverick show. Today I've got with me Jane Bates, change consultant and transformation consultant, who's worked in many different industries across retail, healthcare. Great to have you here. Okay, so I want to switch the subject slightly and talk about leadership and hierarchy and things like that. And we have lots of different models going around at the moment, very flat structures, very hierarchical structures. We have different types of leadership going on, very much the command and control, which is left over from sort of previous many decades ago, versus much more sort of servant leadership, where sort of transformational leadership, coaching leadership, that kind of style. What's your view on where we are at the moment and how hierarchy and leadership interact and how they need to change?
Oh golly, that's such a big topic, isn't it? I think there's several things going on with leadership at the moment. I think within a hierarchy setting, it always beggars belief, I think, that just because you work your way up through the hierarchy, there is an assumption that by virtue of that, your leadership skills will become more honed. And I go, no, just because I've got an extra stripe on my shoulder today that I didn't wear yesterday, doesn't mean that suddenly my leadership skills have broadened or become more expert. I think in its own right, we mustn't forget that a lot of leadership skills and attributes are learnt. And no matter where you sit within an organisation, you need training, you need coaching, you need mentoring. Those disciplines are really, really important. And of course, need to sit against a willing mind, a backdrop of, even though I'm becoming senior, there's no one that I come across that I can't learn from. So I do think when you strip it back, there's a humility attached to learning the more you become senior in an organisation. So I think that in its own right is an interesting piece. I think the other territory that takes you into, of course, is what is the role of the leader in the first place. So I find in a lot of organisations at the moment that have got hierarchy, and a really clear hierarchy, which you have to pass certain thresholds to make it up to the next level, there's a cultural belief that the people are there to serve you. You know, you've reached these dizzy heights of leadership, so your people are there to answer to you. So you direct and it gets delivered to you. See, I'm going, gosh, that's such old style leadership. And actually, you know, our roles, leaders, to my mind, and the only reason you get to be at those dizzy heights is because you understand your role is to serve more and more and more people. Your role there is to create and nurture an environment where everyone can be their true best self. And I go, that's the fundamental, basic position for any leader in an organisation. And if you're not in that space, particularly now with workforce expectations changing, I go, golly, you're going to find this really tough. You're not going to be able to lead your people on the charge. So I think that's interesting. And then I look about inclusive leadership, because there's an awful lot of talk and want and desire to create inclusive cultures, really necessary now for the good of business success and organisational success. Interestingly, when you look at service leadership as a philosophy and you look at inclusive leadership as a philosophy, there are some common attributes and requirements of leaders. You need to be able to display, more so than ever, a real humility. You need to be able to see, hear and recognise all of your colleagues and understand where they are. And in doing that, you need to be willing to have the really courageous conversations on the ground about where people are at. And at that point, then you can define your outcome that you're seeking to achieve. Then let your people go do. Let them bring their creativity and their innovation and allow them to do their best. And your job as the leader is to remove the barriers and constraints and create the conditions for success they are saying is necessary. I go, being a leader, I think, should be a relatively simple job if you can deeply listen, have the time and willingness to connect on that human basis, and don't shy away from difficult conversation. I go, but to do that, there's skill involved. And of course, as a leader, you need to get over your own fear. I've been talking to several leaders recently where I go, you understand that Peter is not in a good place. You know that, right? And they go, well, yeah. And I go, why wouldn't you unpack that? You know, well, what support are you giving Peter? He's been a really valued member of your team. Oh yeah, but it's tricky, isn't it? Because you know what he's going through. You know, God, I might turn into some kind of counsellor, or and you go, okay. So what's stopping you is you don't want to get into territory that you don't feel you're able to deal with. So it's a you problem.
Yeah. Personally awkward. They feel personally awkward.
Yeah. So how do we now equip you as the leader? How do we help? Even if the real gift is, as the leader, being able to come to the conversation and say, I know that we're probably about to have a bit of an awkward conversation, and the awkwardness is on my part. My intention is to reach in and help you. So forgive me if I sound clumsy, but I'm here for you. Gosh, if you could just...
What a great introduction to a conversation.
And human, isn't it?
Yeah.
Human. Who's going to shy away from that? But Peter, who currently thinks his boss isn't seeing him, doesn't recognise he's struggling, is in overwhelm, has got all this mind talk going on now that he can't possibly suggest that he's struggling because he's going to lose his job. What this enormous disconnect. And I see that repeated in so many places at the moment. So I think leaders have a lot to answer for, and they can cast a shadow as well as bring light. And I think that's where we're at with many organisations in tough times right now.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely the sort of philosophy we bring to some of the products we do around, you know, speed to value and helping leaders change to become the catalyst for allowing others to flourish, right? And when you see it happen, it's just amazing because people grow wings. And just grow up in the organisation. It's fantastic to watch. Really, really pleasing to watch. I think I guess we're also seeing is sort of that future leader piece. How do I get to that future leader? We've got a lot of clients at the moment saying, my leadership team is a bunch of managers, not leaders. And maybe that's the sort of Peter principle kind of thing. If you remember, you get promoted to a level where you become incompetent. You know, I was an engineer, then a senior engineer, then a principal engineer, then a head of engineers, then an engineering manager. I'm still just really an engineer, right? Because that's what I'm really good at. But the reality is, I've now been given all these things like looking after people and running a massive team, and I'm ill-equipped to do that. And I don't really understand what's required. So how do we help the manager transition to a leader? Because it is about lifting your head up sometimes. It's I'm in the detail, I'm downward looking versus lifting your head up as well sometimes. Absolutely.
I think that transition from manager to leader is a really interesting one and is critical to talk to. I think so often people aspire to be the next level up. I'm going to the next level up, and maybe haven't even consciously thought about what new demand is that going to place on me.
Yeah.
But I think within the recruitment process, I'm most definitely, if an individual gets the role, that first piece about coaching, so you've made the step from manager to leader. You know, great managers manage a task through to meeting measures of success, they manage performance. Now, your people are going to do that for you. And you're going to be empowering your people. What does that mean you need to amplify? What does that mean you need to turn up? Actually, what about that conversation starts to make you feel nervous and uncomfortable? Let's unpack that and tune in there, because we can support you with that. Yeah. I think it's this notion that because you've been given a leadership position, you are going to know how to do it. It's ridiculous. And so often then, and let's be honest, I mean, in many organisations, when somebody reaches the heady heights of leader rather than manager, you have everybody watching. Now, often there's a couple of dynamics that are happening in that watching pool. You've got some who are going, I'm so delighted that they've gone and made it, and I'm going to follow that person to the end of the earth, and I'm going to do everything in my power to make them a great leader, and I'm going to be seen to follow. And then you've got this other cohort of people going, well, I don't understand why they got it. Why are they different to me? Well, let's see what they're made of then. I'm going to sit here and I'm going to look for the proof points. So he's not a good leader. They weren't a good leader, were they, because of that? Actually, that's very real. I go, these dynamics are happening in organisations all the time. If you're skilled, or if you've got somebody coaching you as a leader, I would go face into that straight away, and go talk to it. I know that many of you are looking at me now and going, how am I going to make the transition from manager to leader? Well, do you know what? I'm about to go on a journey of my own. And this is what strikes me, and this is the support I'm getting, and this is what I need from you. But in return, this is my intention and the endeavour back. You start to contract. And I think this contract between leaders and their teams is so important. And we do it informally all the time with friends and family. But put it in a formal setting, because you're a leader, you don't need to do that anymore, do you?
Oh, that's so true. Of things that you can seem to be able to get away with or not get away with in an organisation seem to be something you do normally and naturally elsewhere. I think one of the other questions I asked you talked about what are you going to do, how things are going to change. And one of the questions I like to ask as well, even of my CEO, is what are you going to stop doing? Right? Because you can't just keep building things on and going, I'm going to do all this, and now I'm going to do that as well, and that as well, and that as well. You've got to start removing some things. So what are you not going to do? And it was interesting how people go, I don't know, what am I not going to? And it's like, well, you can't just add another layer on, right? And so the way we approach leadership, even if we talk about leaders, right, there's leader development and leadership development. I think leader development is that let's go on a course, let's learn some things in a classroom. But leadership development is within the context of followers.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
So we absolutely do both sides of that. We go. There's some things I want you to learn, and now there's some things I want you to do, and we'll help you and hold your hand and observe and have a coaching conversation afterwards about how things went and stuff like that. But it has to be in the context of you working with your teams, right? Because if it's just done in the classroom, it doesn't transfer to real life.
Completely right. Yeah, You've made me think of a very recent conversation. So I was talking to the leaders of this organisation, and they were newly appointed leaders, and I noticed two things in their rhetoric. Every time I said to them, "How are you?" they'd go, "Oh, very busy. I'm very, very busy. I'm very busy. We're very busy. My teams are very busy." And you go, "Okay, very busy, very busy." Okay, and how that had translated in their managerial role was they were doing a lot of tasking, they were managing resources, they had to talk, and the other piece of language they were using is demand is really high. Demand. Right. So I was going, oh, that's an interesting word, isn't it? Not the requests for service are high, but demand is really high and we're really busy. So I'd watched this, and then as leaders, they then started to continue with that rhetoric, demand, busy, demand, busy. When I've come into the organisation is at overwhelm. And there's a frenetic energy amongst everyone. Yeah. And I step in and I go, wow, oh my God, you need so much resilience to work here. What is this? What is this? Very busy, very busy.
It's the thing we do.
And then you start to, and you go, it's a myth and a legend that you're self-creating as leaders because you've taken your reality as managers and the terminology that you would use in the context of tasking and resourcing work, but you've allowed it to come into your leadership space. And this has become the rhetoric of the organisation and how you're leading and the compelling reason as to why. I said, your whole workforce, you've sent out these signals around busyness and demand. So what you've done is you've diminished customer service because it's not about servicing your fabulous customers. It's demand is high, which is now seen as a negative connotation, which translates into busy, frenetic people who are in overwhelm and actually need to pause and take a deep breath. And I think that's been created in that shift from manager to leader without the consciousness of what am I putting out there into the organisation. I thought it was fascinating. And all we've done is started to reframe the language.
So important, language in organisations.
Such a difference. Yeah. Yeah.
That makes me think of, I love the manager talks about busy and demand, and it becomes, like you say, pervasive around the organisation, because what you pay attention to drives through the organisation. That becomes the values. What would a leader say? What words would they use? They probably would use words like, we need to prioritise.
Yes.
And we need to do valuable things.
Yes.
Let me give you context so that you can make the right decisions about doing that.
Yeah.
Everything calms down.
Everything
gets focused, right?
Yeah.
But there's value in being a manager in getting everyone slightly frantic, because we also have this kind of thinking mistake around busy people are productive.
Totally not busy
It's
fools.
not true. Busy people tend to be busy, and that's about it.
Yes.
I've seen so many organisations where we have busy people and not much productivity at all.
Yeah. And I think the busy people piece, going back to the earlier conversation we had around where have people been left post-COVID, where are people in this hybrid of working, busy people, busy fools, busyness requires an enormous amount of emotional resilience as well as physical resilience. And we all sit here and read the reports which say those things are on a low. Yet, so again, when we talk about these conflicting pressures and things at the moment, I'm going, that space where there's a rub and there's a knock, you imagine how that's feeling for that individual colleague. That's what leaders need to be attending to. How do you recognise that, speak to it and go, I can imagine how that's feeling. So I'm going to bring some structure, I'm going to bring some sequencing, I'm going to bring some phasing, I'm going to create you some space to find the resilience that you need, or I'm going to change the way in which we're working to create the resilience. High performing, problem solving, rapid action teams into the office to look at something high energy, but with space around an event to just be and come and decompress and have a space that's created for you. Win-win, win-win.
I love resilience is a great word, and there's a lot of misconceptions about what resilience means, right? And a very dear friend once educated me on this, which is resilience is not the ability to put up with things and tolerate things and bash through. It's the ability to recharge.
Yeah.
Right? It's so that you can recharge and go again. And I coach quite a few people, and it's amazing at exec level when I go, what helps you relax? What helps you recharge? And they go, golf, or I go to the gym, or one 50-year-old exec I was coaching once said skateboarding, which was a surprise for me, but he was a skateboarder. He used to have one in his car all the time.
Brilliant.
But I said, okay, how much have you done recently? I go, well, we're really busy, so it's the first thing that goes out the window. So your catalyst for resilience, i.e. your downtime and your recharge time, is the first thing that gets compromised when you're busy. And it's the thing you should be making time for.
Exactly. It's like the piece on the aeroplane, isn't it? Put your own oxygen mask on first before you try and help others. Yes. I think if you are there as the CEO or the senior leadership team, giving out the notion that I've had to give up those things that are going to make me really, really effective, and I've had to give up those things that are going to make me really resilient. What's the permission to act that you are casting out to your organisation? You are saying subconsciously, my expectation is those are the first things you're going to give up. And I'm going, they're your priority things to make sure they maintain, and you have to give permission and help your people find the space. Incredibly difficult when the climate is so tough. Incredibly difficult. Those will be the organisations that survive, though. Those are going to be the organisations that don't have this huge issue because people are leaving in droves because they can't cope anymore. And those are the organisations where they're not going to have to cope with lots of colleagues, sadly, who are off with mental health issues because you've layered on the back of COVID, more and more requirement. I go, got to see the person. See the person. Comes back to that, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Jane, I'm just wondering, what's the advice for maybe a young person coming through the change agent or transformation agent route? What would your advice to them be?
Oh, there's a few bits of very simple advice. I'd say the old principles, the old bedrocks, the foundations of change. need to be adhered to. They can be applied anywhere, and they are: never lose sight of the customer outcome that you are seeking to achieve. Never lose sight of the people, the colleagues, those who are impacted by the change. Never lose sight of who they are and bringing them on the journey. And check out all the way. You know, have a check and test throughout the whole thing. And if you are coming to a point where you go, this is feeling sticky, things aren't quite going as they should, I tend to look in 3 areas. Is it will that's an issue here? And if it's will, on an organisational level or an individual level, there tends to be a fear at the centre of that. So what is that? How can you address that? How can you lean into that fear? Because remember, often those perceptions of fear, they're not reality, so you can unblock them fairly easily with a mindful ear. It could be the skill isn't there. So what interventions have to be made in order to increase people's skill, to make them feel more comfortable and able? Hugely important piece for change agents moving forward. And then the other one is permission to act. And when I look at permission to act, I go, is it the individual who's stopping themselves from moving with the change? And again, if so, I explore that, get curious. Curiosity, being curious, huge piece of advice there. And then if it's an organisational piece, I don't feel organisationally I have the permission to do that, then you're into what's the culture, or is it a role and responsibility piece? Those really basic pieces, simple models, what's going on here, never lose sight of them, because no matter where we are in the change landscape, you know, high tech, high pace, those things still as relevant no matter where you are on change. And those things will hold everybody in good stead, I believe. I
think that's fantastic advice for any new person trying to get into change and transformation. Actually, some of us old dogs could do with reminding ourselves of those great pieces of advice as well. I just want to say thank you so much for a fascinating conversation, and we've covered huge amounts of ground here, and it's just been brilliant talking to you.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.